I'm joined today by Dan Silvers of Lantana Games, and we're going to be talking about Mondrian. Dan, thanks for taking the time to sit down and talk with us a little bit about this game.
No problem, Jacob. It's been a while. Love you guys at Indie Hangover. Happy to be back.
Awesome. So let's to get things started. Why don't you give people a pitch for Mondrian if they haven't heard of it? What is this game, and why should they kind of be interested?
So Mondrian, Abstraction and Beauty is a brick-breaking game that explores video game art history through the lens of modernism. So a lot of the game is dynamically generated and has a lot of roguelite-ish elements that keep each level fresh, like what color scheme you're going to get, where power-ups are going to be, what paddle and wall and ball you're going to get. And so every single level is completely different. The game emulates technical and color limitations of various game consoles. So the original game lets you explore a couple different games and different color and technical limitations of various consoles, and you can also like jump into the museum and see some artworks of some different friends of ours and some members of the team that we had at the time. We're currently working on a sequel that is more focused on traditional art history,
Mm.
where you can play as five different modern artists and explore their works specifically, as well as make your own levels in the Mondrian Maker level editor, share those with friends all around the world, build your own challenges, and see what you can come up with.
Cool. So the first thing I kind of want to ask about is how these kind of two concepts came together of this kind of block breaking puzzler almost and art history, both from a video game standpoint, the art
Mm,
history of video games, and then from a kind of, like you were saying, a more traditional take on art history as modern art. Um,
mhm.
where did the idea come to put these together?
So the original game was built during a game jam dedicated to Breakout clones. So we had Breakout cloned in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And we were like, okay, so now what do we do with it? So the first thought was to put it in a circle instead of, just the traditional left-right that you get from Breakout Arkanoid. And all basically every single brick breaking game
Right.
for like a 30-year period. A few exceptions, but not many. Um, and as we kept building it, we kind of started to look at it, and we were like, this kind of looks like Mondrian's Victory Boogie Woogie, which was one of his last pieces. And it's a very, very energetic piece. Like normally when you think of Mondrian, you think of the large color blocks
Mm.
and just a few of them. His last few pieces were very focused on minute details, and they almost looked like electrical grids,
Mm.
or like circuit boards with everything running through them. And so just to like call the game Mondrian and to like focus the gameplay on or like the underlying metagame on art history suddenly just clicked with us, and we were like, this is awesome, let's use a brick breaking game to teach art history. And then for the first one, specifically making it about video game art history, that kind of came just like as we started thinking about like the trajectory of timelines in terms of
Mm-hmm.
art history. So you look at traditional art history, you've got classicism, like everything is highly detailed. And then over time, that turned into modernism, where all the details were lost and everything was baked down to its like core colors, core forms. And, only now is like complexity coming back
Mm.
into the art scene, and you've got this split between like neoclassicism and strange contemporary art,
Yeah.
um, versus video game art history due to technical limitations. Started off very
That's
simplistic,
true.
very uh, oh, what's the word? Like abstract,
Mm.
and then as the technology got better, it got more and more realistic. And then only because of the indie scene did everything return to that abstract nature.
That's a very cool parallel to pick up on.
It's an inverse bell curve.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And so we wanted to kind of play with that a little bit and see how like we could use the impressionist works of Pete Mondrian to kind of express that timeline in a we actually we made a bunch of artworks that were like inspired by his impressionist era works and a little bit by his distyle works, but mostly his earlier stuff. And then we would like go into Photoshop and actually reduce the color scheme down to like what you'd get on a Game Boy or an amber monochrome television or an NES or a Genesis, you name it. And then in the game itself, we would actually like use shaders to reduce the resolution and the color scheme of the game down to those same limitations. So we would then make everything match up.
That's a super cool way of taking kind of I don't want to say disparate parts, disparate fields, because video I'll be I'll put my foot down and say video games are art, but in a lot of ways, classical art or more, mainstream art and video games don't intersect that much.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool way to bring them together. So I think that's a super cool story of how that kind of developed. I did want to ask, because one of the things when I was playing Mondrian at Pre-Gamer and at Made in MA, that struck me was the fact that it's circular, that it's kind of like you're playing from 360 degrees, which, like you said, is a really different way of doing the block breaking or the brick breaking formula. Were there any challenges from a design standpoint of making that work, especially where you're trying to have kind of some roguelite elements and some kind of abstraction and just have it there be all these different variables and not have one clear path where it's doing it in a circular format?
I would say from a design standpoint, have you ever like played those games where I don't know the name of it, but it's like you have a ball and there's a little board and you tilt the board around and there's like little kind of holes, like divots around the board where you're trying to get the ball into to get a certain number of points.
It's like Ice Cold Beer or Tumbleseed was a recent game that kind of did stuff like that. Yeah.
So, just thinking about it from a design standpoint, that was kind of sort of what we had in mind with that, or maybe like Hungry Hippos or something.
Yeah.
Like we trying to think of it a little bit more from a board game perspective than from a strictly video game perspective. And then in terms of laying everything out, it really just came down to sort of screen space versus like the space your panel would take up and the space the wall would be in, and then determining the field, like the range for the field of blocks inside the level. So really what we did was we sort of established this language of, we've got the field in the middle, and that's where like all the gameplay takes place. At the edge of the field is your paddle, and really the most challenging part of that was getting the trigonometry to work,
right?
Especially once we started bringing in acceleration and deceleration on that, because in the first build it would just go straight to top speed and it was impossible to control. So adding that like that the delta time element to it made it a whole lot nicer to play.
That's cool that you mention, kind of that formula of balance, because now that you talk about that, I can see it completely. But I would have never made that connection. It's interesting. Yeah, it's clever.
That's game design for you. That's why you need to test.
Right.
honestly. You know, when the first time you make something, you're like, yeah, this is great. I can play it. That means everybody else can play it.
No, not so
No,
much.
no, no, no. So then, you know, in a traditional breakout game, the right, left, and top sides will be, you know, basically a second paddle,
Sure.
and they'll bounce the ball, and then if it goes out the bottom, you lose the ball. But because this is in 360 degrees, we needed a different way to do that. And there would, you know, never be like one specific side where you
Right.
lose the ball, which is why we created the wall that your paddle is flush up against for the game. And it has different holes in it depending on which one loads. And that's, you know, again, randomized
Right.
per level. And then finally, you know, I think the biggest technical challenge besides the trigonometry was also getting the ball to basically ignore gravity.
Hmm.
Because, you know, even if you set gravity to 0 in the engine, its kind of natural tendency is to send, you know, objects downward.
Right.
So
Normally things don't want to ignore gravity. Normally you're doing the exact opposite.
Exactly. So we needed to, you know, add in a little bit of randomization to it to make sure that, you know, it would also go up, left, right, and, you know, any direction. And so there's a lot of like engine finagling that we're still not quite happy with, and we're gonna be probably reapproaching that math at some point this summer or fall.
Cool. Awesome. Well, that's a great look into both kind of how this game got incepted and then kind of some of the cool technical aspects of it. And we'll have links in the comments below this interview to all the different information about this game you can find right now. So
Yep.
we encourage you to go check it out, take a look, you know, wishlist it, put it on your radar if you're interested. I'd like to kind of turn and talk a little bit more about you as a game developer now.
Okay.
And I wonder if you could kind of give us a short version of kind of your history. What drew you to do independent game design?
So I graduated from the Savannah College of Art and Design in 2009, right as the economy collapsed. And, you know, I was looking at potential internships, job opportunities, and for entry level, there were none. There were absolutely none. However, at the same time, the indie scene was really starting to take off with games like Braid and Audio Surf. And Steam had just opened up to independent developers, and things were looking pretty exciting in that space. And so, you know, I said, all right, I know, you know, so at the time, like, I knew some Unreal, I knew ClickTeam Fusion, I knew 3D modeling, I was a master at Photoshop. I knew, you know, some sound design. There were already great resources out there for getting started in independent development. And it turned out there was a local community here, Boston Indies, that was starting to spring up and looking for more people to join in. So I said, I am in. This is what I'm going to do. There's some opportunity here. Let's just make some dang games. I don't know if I expected to still be an indie almost 10 years later. I think by this point I had maybe, you know, was leaning more toward at some point, you know, getting a job in the AAA space. But just like I think, you know, after a year, it was really the community that, you know, kind of made this permanent, and just the outpouring of support. Like when you start making really, really cool things as a developer, you get so much support kind of for whatever you're doing. You know, there's kind of two levels of developer, I've noticed. It's like there's that, you know, I'm just starting out and I'm going to get everything off the Unity asset store, slap it together. That is like, I understand that for starting out, everybody has to start somewhere. But it's like everybody's seen it, everybody knows it, and you can't really make that right kind of impression. When you really start putting in the effort to learn to program, to learn to animate, to learn to compose, to do everything, that is when you as an artist really start to shine.
It's the difference between like tracing and then free drawing. you know.
Exactly. And when you really put in honest to God effort
Mm.
into your art, that gets recognized. And it's a great feeling. So, um, I mean, yeah, so then over time, budget has always been an issue.
Mm.
And every developer, tries to find ways of either making money or scoping their projects to cut down on what they're going to require for it. And, you know, desperately always trying to make deals to get their games onto, brand new platforms. I mean, you look at the obsession with the Switch right
Yeah.
now. Everybody wants to get their games on Switch. And in our case, I don't know, we always kind of struggled a little bit with um, getting those pushes. We got a little bit lucky. We got a game. We got the first version of Children of Liberty Early Access up onto Steam towards the end of it being difficult to get on Steam.
Mm.
So that to us felt like a pretty big win right there, even if the game was like not ready. Honestly, not ready to launch at the time. And we've been, cracking hard on that since, and we just got it into Unity 2018, and we're loving the way that's going. LantanaGames.com, check out the latest blog post. Lots of stuff happening there. But that aside, it's always been, kind of more of a struggle for us than you get the impression that it is for most indie developers.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, they can set up a deal with Microsoft and Sony or Nintendo or whoever. It seems
that platform.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, they get onto stage at E3, and then before you know it, you're showing off your little Yarny doll to the crowd, shaking nervously. That guy is my hero. That guy's my absolute hero. But so what we ended up doing was we saw some demand from some local schools to get some opportunities for their students for like summer internships and whatnot. And so we said, okay, let's take a chance on some of these kids. Turned out great.
Cool.
And so we started thinking like, what if this is our business model? Like, what if our business model is, like half mentorship, half development, and, actually teaching Photoshop, teaching Unity, teaching coding, graphic design, audio, you name it, as it all applies to game development, as well as getting some games under these students' belts before they graduate so that they don't go into the job market completely empty-handed,
right?
And give them a leg up. I mean, we don't necessarily know if it's like, the exact leg up they need. I mean, a lot of studios still are like, yeah, you need 5 published games under your belt and 10 years of experience and whatnot. And at most we can usually give you 1 to 2 games in 1 year of experience. But still, it's better than nothing. And
exactly.
we've had students go on to jobs at Riot, Harmonix, the U.S. Army.
Wow.
Yeah, you name it. We're starting to get a little bit known for what we do, which is kind of cool.
Gotta be a good feeling.
I like helping out, and this is an area that a lot of developers still to this day are like, yeah, we're not taking risks on kids. They don't know what they're doing. And I'm like, well, somebody has to teach them what they're doing. And as a matter of fact, you're wrong. They do know what they're doing.
That's very cool. So I always like to find out what were kind of the games that served as inspiration for people. So maybe you could mention a couple of the games that you recall from like growing up that you're like, yeah, I just played this game. Now I want to make games. I'd say some of what inspired Mondrian, but we kind of already touched on that, and where it was a game jam game. I find that some of the coolest games come out of game jams, but it's a tough question to say, hey, what was your inspiration? My inspiration was I had 48 hours to make a freaking game. But
that does happen, yeah.
So what were some of the inspirations behind your path?
So behind my path, I can remember very specifically
Oh.
just about every single game on this disc, the Activision Power Hit Sci-Fi Collection. In particular, Deathtrack, which really doesn't run anymore because the entire game was based on timing of CPU cycles. And, nowadays it's like what, a million cycles a second, and back then it was like 100 cycles a second or something.
Little problem with scale there.
Little problem with scale. So that game just does not work anymore. I think, some random developer did a sequel a few years ago in Unreal Engine 3 that was just absolute garbage. But that's beside the point. So that one was like the big one that as a kid got me inspired to start making games, as well as Prophecy, an RPG that's in that collection. It's a medieval RPG. I don't know what it's doing in the sci-fi collection, but it's old school and really cool. Like, has a really, really cool style to it. And Minds of Titan also on that collection. It's like that one's somewhat of like an RPG / turn-based strategy kind of thing. A lot of like old school DOS games in there. Full Throttle, obviously, in terms of storytelling, was the one that really got me started on that side. The Mega Man X series. I mean, I played I would say just about everything that came out on DOS, but that's a lie because a lot came out on DOS.
Yeah.
Wow. But I grew up right in the golden age, the renaissance of DOS games. So like right at that same time as the popularity of the SNES and Genesis, I was the one kid at my school who was PC Master Race. So as far as I'm concerned, I invented the PC Master Race. And, I always got picked on for not having consoles, but then like people would come over to my house and be like, what are these games? These are amazing. I've never played these before. And so, people would end up playing like Hocus Pocus or Heretic or, whatever. And, just mind blowing stuff. Like consoles didn't have first person shooters. No. PC had first person shooters. It's just a completely different realm for gaming at the time. And I'm so, so grateful that is what I grew up on.
Yeah, absolutely. So final question to pull things to a close. We always ask developers what other games out there in the indie scene are capturing their attention. So do you want to shout out maybe a couple games that you're excited to see how they develop?
Ooh, oh my God.
Nice easy question, there's not like a ton of indie games out there to pick from.
Right? Yeah, that is the huge problem is, last year, I think it was 7,000 games launched on Steam.
The numbers are incredible for the launch titles and how many there are right now.
So you know what I'm going to do instead of listing specific games, because I would feel like I'm leaving 10,000 games out and that would not be right. What you should be looking up instead is this website created by Ichiro Lam from Dejoban Games. I'm going to try to find the name of the site right here. I'll find it. He has it somewhere. Yeah, that's it. It's called What's on Steam. What'sonsteam.com. And what it does is it immediately aggregates new titles on Steam as soon as they come out.
Oh, cool.
So, and like, I think it does upcoming releases as well. So, yeah. So you can do latest games. And Steam changed their algorithm a couple years ago to have like, top releases and then popular new releases, but you never see like every single release as it comes out. This is the site to go to check out all the new things coming out.
Cool.
Sometimes it's in, maybe a language you don't speak, so that doesn't help you very much, but like it looks cool. And then it says like launched 9 hours ago, launched 12 hours ago, launched 14 hours ago. Like here's one called Coffee Crisis, a neo rogue brawler that puts you in the shoes of the only baristas on Earth with enough heavy metal in their veins to fend off an alien assault. Have I mentioned I love video games? Like
That's cool.
You cannot create a pitch like that in any other medium.
It's true.
Maybe comic books.
Yeah, comics would be the only one that would hold, even a match to it, but
Yep.
then comics doesn't have the interactive nature of
Exactly.
video games to back that up.
Exactly.
Well, that's a cool resource for people that are using Steam to find indie games. So
Yeah.
we'll have a link to that for sure down below so people can check that out.
Yeah. And I mean, otherwise, go on to IndieDB, and, check out what's new up there. It is difficult to find games. And, while I do play a lot of indie games, like I play lots of Awesome Knots. I've put 300 hours into Awesome Knots. And what else? Like Dust Force is obviously incredible, but very, very difficult to play. Ori and the Will of Wisps is probably my most anticipated game, my most anticipated indie game this year. When that trailer came up at E3, I legit cried. I actually kind of knew the guys who made it way back in the day on Jazz Jackrabbit 2. We used to play Jazz Jackrabbit 2 together, and then they go off and made this game, and they were big members of the community. They, we all did like level design in that, and it was the Jazz Creation Station is actually a big inspiration for Mondrian Maker in the latest Mondrian Plastic Reality. So yeah, so like I have a connection with those guys, and Ori and the Blind Forest, absolutely beautiful.
Gorgeous.
Will of the Wisps comes up at E3, and I just hear that music line. Like at first I wasn't sure, like I'm watching the trailer and I'm like, this looks like Ori. Oh my god, tell me this is Ori. And then it does the and I'm on the floor, like curled up fetal position. I'm like, no way. So yeah, Will of the Wisps. That is probably my most anticipated indie for the year.
Awesome. Well, there's some good stuff to follow up with. Dan, thanks for taking the time to talk to us about Mondrian and about
Thank you, Jacob.
Your background. We'll have links below to all the stuff we've talked about.
Yep.
And please keep us in the loop on further developments.
Absolutely.